European Union, a lot changed, and we have to be a bit more rigorous and understand that things could have changed a lot, but we have to be aware of the changes that actually occurred. And so in 86, 87, that was the time of logistic chain management, so to say, and it was an opportunity for us. Why? Because the country had very few solutions in terms of transport infrastructures, both maritime or by road or by airways, and there was a great need for someone to be able to help us to find mechanisms and channels of circulation for the cargo that could be more efficient. Well, you can go buy warm bread now, and at the end of the 80s and during the decade of the 90s, that's what happened, because houses, cars, televisions, all of this was like hot bread coming out of the oven, air conditioning, refrigerators, everything. So this moment of celebration, not only in terms of consumption, because there were great needs from the part of the Portuguese population, there was a greater need to improve the logistic offer. And so I started working in that sector, in management, and I was able to accompany several moments of great jumps and great improvements. For example, starting a project, a business project, where a great client, a great multinational, invited us to establish a proposal to keep the trucks, the distribution trucks that they had, and the warehouse workers that they had. As we sent the proposal, 2 days later, they would call us and we would establish a contract, and everything was like that. Well, sometimes we didn't have any competition at all, or one or two operators only, and so when we thought the price wasn't interesting, we could have another option. We could move on to the next project. So this was the reality back then. From then, we worked for another 20 years, and during these years, the 21st century was a milestone, because there was a change in the search of logistic answers. And the financial benefit of the managers of logistic chain and the answers that we have to give are completely different. We discuss more and more the cost and not so much the service, and this is a reality that even nowadays is persistent and too much. And this is a fundamental concern, besides all the logistic quality that we have to ensure, that is the quality through the competitiveness of the cost. And this brings some questions and some difficulties. In my 20 years of career, I've been working in great international companies in terms of national distribution as well, by road transport, with connections with the forwarders, with air transport, and with road and railway transport. I developed answers with teams that were multi-channel solutions for the distribution. And so when we had to bring products from Europe and take products to Africa and vice versa, all of this allowed me to work with lots of groups and lots of companies, both national and international. A great German logistic operator, that is the FI group, that nowadays doesn't work anymore with Portugal, but and now we work with a French one. But all of this made me understand that the logistic answer is more and more fundamental for the efficiency of a product, whether it is a fruit, whether it is wine, whether it is shoes. Why? Because this is globalization. The actors, the economic activity and material activity are spread all around the world, and competitiveness implies that we should have logistic answers that are reliable in terms of cost, in terms of reliability, in terms of delivery rates, and everything is essential for a country to be competitive in terms of logistics and in terms of cooperation among nations. So we're going to speak here about the supply chain in the 21st century economy, and in the following days we will be reinforcing what the fundamental characteristics of the supply chain management should be, and we'll be repeating it all through the training. How does it contribute in the success or the lack of success of an economy, of a company, of a region, and how it affects a region or the country in economic terms? I've been through some very complex weekend management
internet.
that implied lots of workers, more than 1,000 workers, lots of logistic platforms, lots of customers with differentiated solutions or with typical solutions. And I hope that I might share my experience with you and that you might share with me your experience as well. From 2006, I've become a trainer and a consultant. In 2012, I almost gave up company management, and now I work in strategic and operational management and here in Portugal, but also in the countries, in the Portuguese-speaking countries. So it's important here to affirm our principles in other lands and to respect the opinions of others, of course. But I believe that I was a moment of victory in 2015 and 2016. I would like for you to introduce yourselves now. We have here custom brokers, we have forwarders, freight companies. So I'd like for you to present yourself and tell me what globalization is for you. One strong idea that each one of you might have about globalization. George, can you start? We need the microphone. We can't forget the microphone. I'm Jorge Oliveira. I work as a forwarder, and I work with shipping agencies in the area of maritime transport. I've been working for 4 years in this area. It's quite a new area for me, and I'm trying to acquire new knowledge through this training. Globalization, for me, it's the free movement of goods and people, of course, in the planetary space, and not just that, and through the whole world as well. Okay, so we have one topic here that is the free movement of goods. Well, free is a variable term because there are situations. Good afternoon, I'm Patricia Pereira. I work as a custom broker. I'm a daughter and great daughter of custom brokers. I've not been working for a very long time in this area, but I'm starting to get some interest, and I thought that this training would be very important. So right now I'm just and I'm a little bit limited in terms of timetable. Well, we'll see in terms of structure how this is going to work. For me, globalization, what's most important is to have a predisposition towards an easier circulation of goods and of people, for them to reach their destination easier without restrictions. And I think that's the most important factor. Claudia. My name is Claudia. I work as a customs broker for 8 years now. I also wanted to improve. I have the same problem as Patricia here. Moving on. Globalization, I believe it doesn't just have to do with transport, but everything the same everywhere. So another concept. Fernando. Well, I wrote down Fernando, but I prefer Miguel. So for me, you can be Miguel, no problem, since I don't forget. Okay, well, if you call me Fernando, I'll react to the name as well. I'm Miguel Freire. I've been working as a forwarder for a few years, and I would also like to acquire a little bit more knowledge, but I'm more connected to the part of development, management, and control of quality. And so in this part that I would like to insert this training more. Regarding globalization, I believe that nowadays it offers more validity for all the products, the goods to circulate, but also to have a bit more productivity. And well, for example, everything has to be the same, I believe, as my colleague said, but I think that we should differentiate ourselves as well. Gonçalo. Are you Gonçalo? Yes, I am. My name is Gonçalo. I'm 25 years old. I also work as a forwarder. I've been working for 2 years. Are you colleagues? Yes, we are. Well, please make some publicity for other colleagues that are abroad, and will give us the name of the forwarder. I'm in the commercial department, a bit more focused on air and road transport. And so this training came up, and I think it's very interesting to acquire a bit more knowledge in terms of maritime transport. When it comes to globalization, for me, it's a world without frontiers where trade is much more liberal, and that powers economic growth. Vasco, is it your name? Yes, it is. Vasco Almeida. But I'm also a Miguel, by the way. But I can call you Vasco, right? Yes, you can. I'm Vasco Almeida, 44 years old. I have 3 children. I'm a forwarder. I've been a forwarder for 6 years. Not with my own fleet. I under hire all kinds of transportation by air, by railway. I believe that it's pretty much here. Well, is everyone here from the Portuguese football club Benfica? Well, in terms of globalization, I think that everything was said here. Well, a lot was said. Well, I think that a bit of several things that we are here to try and develop, and that's my goals. Thank you for this first contribution, for your presentation. And in terms, well, I have jumped a little point here. As you know, the time will be here is from 2 to 7. Of course, you're all working people, so it's difficult for you to organize things. And we're trying to ask you for your best effort to be here in time. We're going to have 2 coffee breaks because, of course, it's a large period. We'll have one at 4, and around 6, we'll have another little break to go till the end, and we'll finish at 7 or a little bit earlier. This is the timetable that we established. Since this is a training that will give certificates, not of participation, but of training, during the session, we're going to ask you to collaborate, to do some interventions, to share, and we're also going to do some case studies with written answers or written parts. So we have an evaluation process. The way you participate is, of course, the most important factor. Your presence is as well very important, and all of this makes it possible for you to have a certificate that is recognized, and that in terms of curriculum is an added value for you who will still be working for many years. So I'd like for the way that the training works to be clear, and of course your assiduity and your punctuality is a very important factor. There is some tolerance, there is some comprehension, but I would like you to try and be on time. Any more questions? Methodological, operational? Well, we're now going to speak about globalization. You have a sheet of paper in front of you. I'd like for you to think, well, from the moment you woke up until now, think about the things you did, the things you used or that you are using that connect you to globalization. 5 things. During the day, from the moment you woke up until the moment you came here, each of you probably has 5 objects or 5 actions that you did that connect you directly to the globalized world. It's true. You may write down 5 topics. No, you don't have to write sentences nor theory.
It's an impact action. Hmm? Yeah, it was only made in one place. Yeah, it was assembled in one single place. What's the car? It's a BMW, okay. The original factory was in Germany. Korean, also, from the Czech Republic. Not only German origins of components that are throughout Europe and other continents assembled in Germany. Well, a German car, why is it German? We could say BMW, or rather, it's a German car. Because you say it is a German car, right? It's because it's assembled in a German car. Well, the cars are assembled here in Auto Europa are Portuguese or German. Well, it's a mixed thing. Well, who buys them doesn't say, well, I bought a Volkswagen from Portugal. What's in the origin? Despite being a car with materials and components that it's globalized, of a nationality, because it's the one that interests the most, because it's associated with reliability, resistance, and honesty. Please don't laugh. Did I say any joke? it's not the brand, it's something else, because the brand, it's when it's made in Stubal also. It's Volkswagen when it's made in Stubal or in Hamburg, right? It's not the brand, it's the same. What's the difference? There you go, the conception, the development. It's the gray matter that's behind that process that fathers that important factor, because the globalized economy, we need to find differentiating factors. Because if there are no differentiating factors, the competitive advantages of creation are not stated. So it's a good contribution. Next. The exchange of emails from and to, well, I just sent one for a French client. So communication or phone calls also. Communication is very important, and it's a very important data for the logistical processes. George, microphone, please. TV, for example. Yes, TV, and you hear news from all over the world, an interaction between all the countries. The television was made where? The TV? Good question. Right? What is a brand? There are a lot of them, but the one that you connected, it's Sony. So it's Japanese brand with components that are all over the place. So thank you, Claudia. Car, internet. I was in net banking. Let's see if Gonçalo has another idea. But usually, a network of agents, for example, we as other freight forwarder, we have a network of agents for 50 years. Was that globalized? Okay, without a question, but it's much more globalized now, because I can find people in Madagascar, and 50 years ago they did not have internet there. Yes, but they had correspondence. There was someone there. Vasco. I wrote the clothes, for example. I got dressed. No one said the clothes. Most of the clothes that we are wearing probably was not made in Portugal, right? The watch, telephone, what we eat. Why am I asking for this exercise? It's for us to understand how we are immersed in events or objects that have to do with globalization. So I leave you with a question now. The exchange of communication, taking note of information of the world abroad, overseas, and circulation of goods, is that enough to say that we are globalization? Is this enough? I'm just getting back here just to give you some order. We have an example there. And just to give you this for you to follow, but this is for a simple debate. For centuries, for millenniums, that the products circulate between oceans, continents, and regions. Is this true or not? And could we say that's globalization? Or does it need an intensity factor, a factor of frequency, and a factor of a complete invasion of our way of life to say that we are facing a globalization? Or do you think the exchanges of communication and products need to be so intense and so frequent and so important in our everyday life that we can speak about globalization? And this is seen when we are thinking, trying to assembly line of glasses, for example, and everything is designed in Porto or Lisbon or Braga. But then, when we are producing or we are manufacturing the product, it's decided that by economic and material resources reasons, or where the machines are, and people with the skills to produce it, they will be produced in China, India, Indonesia, or maybe in Italy. It can happen also. So this is a factor that we need to take into account. Globalization is not a recent phenomenon. Some say that Portuguese were the ones at first had a moment of globalization when in the 1500 years with the conquering of Ceuta in 1415, we take the first step to build an economy on a world scale. But is that enough to characterize that we are facing a globalized economy in 1480, in 1560? Is this enough? This is a factor that we know that there are economies that are really dominated by a center, an economic and a political center that simultaneously is managing the moment of civilization and can place in communication several economies and several different worlds. We have the case of the Silk Route from Europe, the Mediterranean world dominated by Romans, that thanks to it had two great wars with people from Africa, from the Mediterranean coast of Africa, namely the power that you heard of the Carthaginians, which was a struggle for the route of cereal and the transportation of cereal to domain the production area of cereal, which is that region that we call Tunis and Algeria. This shows us that we had before moments in which the existence of economies of a planetary dimension already existed. But could we say this is globalization? Maybe not. Maybe we could say great part of the commerce that was made in these routes, in this world, the Roman world, the connection between the Western and the Oriental world, the passage for Turkey, for Syria, and from there to India and China. But those were not worlds in which the scale and dimensions of the exchange could be placed in these terms. Most of the clothes that in the Roman Empire they wear, do you think it was made in China? Or in Turkey? Or in Indonesia? Or in any of the regions that we call Russia? Of course not. People would wear clothes that was made by themselves or near them. There is a very important factor to allow us to distinguish two concepts, and this is important because we think that globalization is recent. There are moments that are preceding to the globalized economy, are the ones that the experts call the economy of the world, Mediterranean world, of the British Islands, of the Northern Sea, of the Baltic Sea, in which they have a strong commercial activity in the 12th and 13th century from the Hanseatic League dominated in Hamburg, where there was no Germany at all, there were German states. Instead, we need to understand that what brings globalization to be a new data in the history of man. The intent of the commercial exchanges, the intensity of sharing of information, of the management concepts and the production experiences, and the economical competition between economic nations happens with a great intent on a planetary scale. How can we translate this simply? The production of a pair of shoes in a good area in the north part of the country competes with production located in Spain also, Italy, China, Indonesia, and all of them can have in common geographies of consumption that are shared, right? So the market for the French shoe, French consumer, Italian, North American, Brazilian also, is a market in which Portuguese producers and Spanish producers are trying to get their slice. And that never happened as it does today. Not only we're sharing the target market, but we are sharing also the market processes that are used and the resources that are used also, as well as the tools that are used. In production, we distinguish five or six main points on the improvements in how they can happen, or to see how we can be more competitive and overcome an improvement process. We call it continuous improvement. Those factors called fixed ends, it has to do with English. Throughout these 3 days, part of what's the program that will be said today will be talking about Tuesday, Wednesday, but what we were about Tuesday and Wednesday, we will speak today, because this is dynamic training, okay? Takes sense, you can see, right? TrainMoS II, and then materials. When we analyze the production chain of shoes, great parts of materials, the Portuguese shoe or the Spanish shoe or the shoe that was produced, we will find in another country, for example in Turkey. Materials are probably almost the same. It's leather or synthetic, right? Or rubber. So the materials are shared by these 4 regions that can produce shoes. Probably when we were speaking about 500 years ago or 2,000 years ago in Rome, shoes that were produced in Rome were completely different than the ones were made in Anatolia or in Bithynia. They were completely different. What we have today, the share of materials, the usage of oil products that is in many shoes is common to all the globe. So one of the things that characterizes this moment of globalization, the first moment is to see that materials are common to all competitors in production. Then we have another end. Today it's machine equipment. Do you think they're different, or probably they can be common? Machines in Turkey are different from machines in Portugal or Spain or Norway? Probably not. It might be development there, but it is quickly shared. We have another end. Do you know what it is? For example, people, men, persons, labor. Do you think that Turkish and Portuguese men are that different? Of course, Portuguese people are nicer, more handsome. Is there a substantial difference? It might be, but not from the departure points. But we can find a factor of competition that can make some difference here, which is the so-called quality of labor, specialized labor, that it's not only a scientist. Specialized labor can be in an industry or in a production of a workshop that will make a difference in a market where the products are competing. This is common, but it can be a factor of difference. Okay, we have another end, but we can place it as the method. And once again, here method can be the same, but it can also be factor of difference. Where are many young people that are migrating? Why? Because of their professional quality, by the set of knowledge that they have, and by the method that they can bring with their work. Great part of the population that is in Angola, in Mozambique, in Colombia, in Peru, or in England, they are migrating. Why? Because in the market where they migrate to are markets that need personnel that can make a difference with work methods. So here it is common, but it can be a differentiating factor because all of this is involved, constitutes, promoted and developed in the quality of management, which is the fifth thing, management. Management, once again, is common, but it can make a difference. The last M, it's environment. Not pollution, but the environment regarding support to investment, fiscal environment, social environment, functioning of justice. Do you think this is the same everywhere, or can it really be different? It can be. That's why the International Organization of Commerce has a global perspective of competitiveness in different states. We have been in the 40th and 50th place, where we have in more than 160 states. And these factors, with a highlight on this one, is the environment, the social, institutional, and political perspective that helps a lot of deciders to make their decisions about investment. What does this have to do with globalization? It has to do with the six fundamental principles for the decision of investment and for managing a project of business that tries to find ideal situations of competitiveness, has a lot to do with the local conditions. This six and any questions? Please. Claudia, you were looking at me, but are you understanding what I'm trying to say? Globalization, it does exist, but for us to compete in a globalized world, we need to understand the level of maturity. It's a very important data. Maturity of management. Okay? And I will give you very distinct examples that have to do with you and with those who are listening to it. That is environment, the mental factor for globalization. Someone who wants to invest in a project for an hotel in Portugal or Tunisia. Well, regarding the events of the last 5 years, probably where would the evaluation of the environment help? Tunisia and Portugal. Tunisia. In first place, because it's a country where tourism has been increasing. But why? For several reasons. The environment, comparing with Tunisia, what's the difference? It's a safe country. Security, safety, of course, it's a critical factor. Maturity of the security process of those who visit Portugal is completely different because unfortunately citizens of Tunisia, they deserve better, of course, but this is a reality. In this case, it's favorable to Portugal because we have an environment of policies that is quite peaceful and social also. Another question, do we have the same situation of alternative investment either in the A or C place where Portugal is once again, but it's a company that wants to implement itself? but it has a charge problems with suppliers and clients. So the option can be in Portugal or, for example, in Denmark. Looking at justice system and times of enforcement of justice, do you think that the option of this investor will be in Denmark or Portugal? Gonçalo, why in Denmark? Because the courts take years and years to solve the processes. Okay, these are factors that when we are thinking about the supply chain management, no one tells us about them. It's about the cost and labor. This is the solution for everything. And they are telling us about the technological delays, but we need to have the notion that we are now introducing this concept of six sense. This one, the environment, brings us to understand there are several questions contributing to the success of the nation's logic of global competition, because of course global competition exists, and with defects, with flaws or virtues, it exists to evaluate a set of indicators that have to do with the maturity of the processes of governance of each country, maturity of management processes of each economic, each country and region. These are elements that are taken into account in the deciders of the great world businesses, because one of the characteristics of globalization is, as a Greek economist says, the Nobel of economy for Krugman. Investors of a country many times invest funds in another nation. Much more companies are multinational or subsidiaries that work in different countries. An increasing number of people who are working in different countries from where they were born, the development of all these areas of economical binds for a country is for Krugman globalization. This intent of binding, of economical binding and commitments between people and states that fundamentally characterizes globalization. Now, we, countries of the South Basin of Europe, need to look for the empowerment of our competitive factors, knowing that those competitive factors are not exclusive of ours. This means that we have to understand that within these 6 M's, this is a simple approach. They must be more complex. But how are we positioning ourselves? Because usually what we know is that Portugal, with cheap labor, it's a factor of the success factor is cheap labor. Do you think that's different? Globalization? George, microphone, please. In Portugal and in the world, we compare our cost of labor. Well, there are other countries that have cheaper labor than us. Our bet here is in quality. Someone else wants to say something? Vasco, Patricia, Claudia, Miguel? No one wants to say anything else? On the last 4 years, what we saw was clearly that, well, I mixed up the presentation. Sorry for that. In the last 4 years, what we saw in Portugal is the main economic measure that was made to create competitiveness. Which one was it? Do you think? Economical measure. It was technology, differentiation, innovation. Do you think? Innovation? Yeah. Question. You're a freight forwarder. I think that's it. Quality of service in Portugal is recognized in different sectors, but What happened in the last 4 years? We had a strong lack of salary value. The most important factor for the last 5 years, to be fair, last 6 years, because it's not only this government, let's be fair. What we had was a loss of value of labor. The main factor of competition that was introduced in the Portuguese economy, these are specific data, was the loss of value of salaries, the increase of the fiscal charge of minimum salary stalled, and is a variety. So we can have architects, as you know, starting working with 500 euros. This does not happen anywhere in Europe. This allows that an office, Portuguese architects, or a construction company in the structure of the HR, when they have a technical value team that pays in a value that is very inferior. I'm not saying it's fair or not, but it's lower than in a similar company in Germany, has a competitive advantage because the structure of design and innovation of the project sets in the cost unit hour on architect that is clearly inferior to a Finnish or a German or a French architect or even a Spanish one. So a greater part of the capacity of creating is a very important concept. Value chains global was set in the loss of value of this resource of labor. And all of you who are younger know this. Labor lost a lot of value. It could be by the inflation effect, but it was by the condition of negotiation of new contracts, because the unemployment, there was a growth in the unemployment, there was a destruction of labor. In the last 6 years, there are more people for the same place. So what we have to say, we raise the stakes or we can lower the stakes. What do you think? Will they pay more or less? If you exit your labor today, and maybe you are not Leonardo da Vinci in your area, all of us, we go to a similar activity. What we will try to propose will be less that we are winning now. Someone would quit 10 years ago from the company A, they would go to B and they would win more. But what happened in the last 6 years was the contrary. One of the factors that we had as a competitive factor for the global economy was the reduction of labor. And why? Because we needed to compete in shoes, in porcelain, in textile production, because we're opening a tax in China or the OECD. Part of our production that had a position regarding the cost of labor favorable to other European industries, with an entrance and a new commercial treaty that allowed for the Chinese production that without any barriers in Europe. What did they produce? Mass unemployment, not only in Portugal, but in the sectors of clothing and apparel throughout Europe, because the cost of Indonesia or China labor was much inferior, because the globalization implies different regimes on the two stages of globalization, the so-called developed nations. What happens is that what one is gaining regarding the Chinese production will bring that the salaries themselves are starting to grow in those countries. What's the difference in labor in Portugal for the difference of labor in China or Indonesia? In 6 years, happened is that it was a huge gap, but now we are balanced because we lost. There was a loss here in labor. In China and Indonesia, they went up in the level. And hence the question, how can we compete in the globalized world? It needs to be throughout the other ends, not materials, because they are the same, machines are the same, but it is true information, training, management, and methods of work. That is a differentiating factor today, And in the future, more and more, it will be the gray matter. And gray matter is not Pythagorean theorem. These are basic things applied to management. It's gray matter that's making a difference. The ability of each professional in its flavor and its mission to be effective, to be efficient, what it does. That's what makes a difference. And we can say, well, how can this make a difference? Well, we are addressing a fundamental matter, which is circulation of products. Of course, that the logistic component is fundamental, because bringing the product from the A to the B point that has 1,000 kilometers is one thing. From the A to C that has 10,000 kilometers, it's completely different. The skills that are needed for one business and the other are completely different. The logistic operator needs people who know how to write and speak in English and Spanish and Italian and Mandarin, but it's not only writing and speaking, but also thinking of solutions.
And they have to evaluate the risk factors that in the chain of good circulation at a long distance can provoke some issues. And you know, the Portuguese professionals in logistics world are very valued. In England, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, there's a lot of Portuguese operators that are route managers, that are freight forwarders, that work in trading in London for many reasons. One of them being the ability to improvise. In the logistic world, well, we work with lots of very improbable factors such as climate conditions, and the capacity to transmit confidence here is very valuable. This is a characteristic, a Portuguese characteristic that we have to work on this industry. And since we come from a country that is not a great country in terms of geographic or demographic factors, our ability to live the world comes from the fact that we dominate lots of languages. So we learn English. We don't expect people to learn Portuguese, otherwise we won't be able to speak to anyone. So we adopt other languages, and that's one competitive advantage of Portuguese people when they are logistic operators. They speak English, Spanish, Italian. If they have to speak Swedish, they will do it. It's not a difference yet. It's that globalization has made the Portuguese language not only one of the most spoken languages in the world, but also one of the languages of the economy that in the 20th century has most grown, and that is namely Brazil, of course, and Angola, and now Mozambique. So, of course, Brazil and Angola are now in descending cycles due to the oil crisis, but this has been a competitive advantage. And this advantage comes from a quality of the workforce, the human factor that is able to differentiate itself through the knowledge, through the ability of the gray matter that I'm speaking about. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now, globally, how does this contribute for the competitiveness of the product in the globalization? How does this contribute? We understood that there are several differentiating factors. We compete through the local environment for a country that is more friendly of the investors because it has a juridic frame that works, a country that offers better knowledge of its workforce, of its engineers, of its architects, also much more interesting. But there's another component that is very important, and this is the logistic management. If we have people and companies and infrastructure that make it easier for goods to circulate, is it easier or less easy for an investor to choose local A over local B? Is it easier? What do you think? Let's give an example here to see if it inspires you. This is the question. For you, can Portugal be the end of Europe or the beginning of Europe and of the world for Europe? Wait, where's the microphone? It can be both things, the end or the beginning. Yes. Vasco, want it to be always the beginning or not? Well, it depends. I think that importation is the way to go other places. It's the beginning of exportation and of importation. The idea is for us to be at the end of the world or at the center of the world. What do you think? In this case, we'll be in the center. Well, but we'll only be in the center if in logistic terms, because it's not our ability to consume that's going to make us the center of something. It's our geographic localization and what is our presence in a set of two or three things. First of all, we are in the middle of the Atlantic and at the end of the European continent or the beginning of the continent, depending on importation or exportation. So geographic localization is a very important factor. Another one is the fact that we are very close to the nations that have more natural resources and that have had most economic growth during the last 20 years, that are nations that are in the South American continent, Brazil and other countries, and the African continent, that is a continent that in terms of resources contributes to the world economy, but also resources that they use themselves, and it's one of the most dynamic nations in this aspect. And Portuguese is a very important language, management language. The third factor that is very important is our geographic, the security that it Portuguese ports have some characteristics that we don't find easily in Europe. And my colleagues are going to speak about it, and we are mainly speaking here about the depth of our ports that allow them to work all year long or a certain number of years throughout the year that is most superior to our competitors. Is this clear for you? That has to do with assessment, with having maritime ports, oceanic ports that do not come from hard channels. For example, the port of Rotterdam has a very difficult access for a certain set of ships can only enter and exit in 1 hour, or otherwise they'll just be stuck, and they enter with an entrance of a difference of 50 centimeters, otherwise they couldn't navigate it. So this is a reality that has to do with the logistic offer that a country can provide, and our logistic offer can be an advantage. Our logistic offer is combined and doesn't just have to do with road transport and other transport modes. It has to do with railway transport, road transport, maritime transport, and also airways transport. So we're close enough to several consumption centers and production centers within Europe and in other markets, namely Brazil, and this makes sense to you. This way, we can have a competitive advantage. I don't know if some of you studied economy or management. Some of the things that have been theorized during the years, and as Adam Smith says it's the ability of international labor division. Does it make sense to you? Claudia, microphone, please. Well, you speak about him a lot. Our friend Adam Smith here, who just out of curiosity, was a priest in the Scottish Church, and economy was always very associated to its moral development, and he had a concern that was the greater development of resources that could enable a society, a growing society, and that would decrease in a way the inequality conditions, or would improve the living conditions of the population and not just of the greater classes. So Adam Smith said that this would only be possible through the work division, increasing capacity and dexterity, because it allowed us to save some time and to create specialization through the different machinery. I'm not sure if you're aware that Adam Smith was very important for Portugal, and especially for northern Portugal, because he theorized the international division of work, which meant that each country should do what he's most capable of doing and what he has more resources to do. And so each country should do what they can do better, and people who don't have these conditions should do what they can do best. So this is a kindness of thinking that is quite transparent. But on the other hand, it can be a cause of development of nation or a cause of inequalities among nations, because in Portugal, we were a country that produced agricultural goods. Here we speak about port wine, for example, other wines as well. Vegetables and natural resources. In England, back when Adam Smith was writing, which was the main world empire back then already, with colonies in all continents, with a great capacity of production in terms of cotton, in terms of steel. And so England had a greater advantage, a greater economic advantage in terms of GDP, of world GDP in the 18th century. And so England could transform products in machinery, in everything that had to do with mechanization and with industrialization. That's why we're going to have the Industrial Revolution, because since they dominated the resources in the planet, still not being a globalized economy, it was a internationalized economy, and so we had some business of added value. Added value is something that someone adds to the product that makes the product generate more money. So it has an advantage when compared with other products. And so Adam Smith told us something that was quite true, and that is still true nowadays, as Claudia can tell us, and that created conditions to reinforce the technological dominion of England, because England not being blessed with fruit, for example, and with the ability to be a great wheat product, they had the industrial component of material life, and so they created conditions so that several years later, England is still an industrial reference, but it has reached another level because the world has become more complex. The weight of information to invest somewhere, to exit one place and be in another tomorrow, is very important. And nowadays, London is no longer the capital of history. What do you think is well, of course, it's the financial capital of the world. It's the place in the world where every day money comes in and out. And it's the place in the world where we create most employment every day, because once again, the English economy, due to a solid tradition of production, of scientific production, of the economy, understood that the next step was not industrialization, but the industry of money, the financialization. And so this is not very important for our theme, but it's important to understand this. The ability to build scenarios of what's going to be important in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years is a fundamental factor to differentiate the economy. And England and the Anglo-Saxon world has been systematically ahead in this process. Now, when we hear about Adam Smith, we have to understand that he was right. The international division of work makes sense, because it doesn't make sense for someone to create a great atoll with great pools in Iceland, for example. It doesn't make sense, but it makes sense to do it in Algarve, for example, in the south of Portugal. So it's important to understand the relation between some investments that we do in some places or others in other places. And it comes to us, every nation, every state, to understand what makes a difference in terms of resources, for example, and besides materials. I think that's very important. We need to have the technical resources, the human resources, globalized economy, we have to understand what it means to be efficient in importation or exportation. For example, when a ship filled with containers takes 8 days to be unloaded, does that produce efficiency or inefficiency? The product that we're going to buy transforms now. Does it get cheaper or more expensive? More expensive, of course. So when more and more the goods circulate all around the world, everything that takes time from the conception to the final consumer, we're going to call it the final client, we must all focus on. Is it or is it not a determinant factor for the success? If we are Italian and Greek clients that produce shoes that have quality, that have great leather, great rubber, everything, and if the production method is good, the shoe is resistant and it's comfortable, the production cost is also reasonable. It's among the 5 cheapest, but it's not the cheapest. It's in a quite good position, and so it can be a great buying option. But if then we have logistic chains that are not efficient, can we get, even if we can get to the final consumer, is he going to choose us? And this is where we need to start and understand that this dynamic that is that the globalization chain, we have here the production, and it's fed by several origins. And when it exports, it's going to export to one first place that can then irradiate and irradiate again. So we're not sure where the final client is going to be. And so it's very important to understand something here. These factors, if they are efficient, if these logistic steps are efficient, are they a factor of advantage or disadvantage for the final customer to buy our product? Advantage or disadvantage? Advantage, of course, if they are efficient. Back then, if our logistic chain is also efficient, instead of taking 60 days, it only takes 30. Is it an advantage or disadvantage? First, because we're going to produce with less investment, we're going to have less money stuck. We're going to have less warehouses. If we have less warehouses, we have less rent to pay or less investment in terms of fixed assets to pay to bank, for example. We have less workers in the warehouses and more workers in the production. Why? Because we're trying to introduce a factor of cooperation, of quality in the whole process. And since we speak of the logistic chain as a competitive advantage, as Mr. Adam Smith was saying, and all of this because the logistic advantage is nowadays a fundamental factor for the success of a product, because more and more our client is not the person that pays for the order that we deliver. Our client is the final client. When a client asks you to send something, of course your client is going to pay for that delivery. But it's your intermediary client, your final client is going to be the client that is going to buy somewhere the product that was sent by you and that was satisfied with that product. Because if it's not satisfied in 6 months, your client will probably no longer ask for your service, because at the destination of the purchase, someone was upset, someone wasn't satisfied with the cost, with the time he's been waiting for. All of this is the advantage of a logistic chain. We understand more and more that the stocks that almost don't exist in the shops when we go buy something. This happens in Lisbon, it happens in Porto, and in other European countries and Asian countries as well. In the societies of the Northern Hemisphere, this is even more true, because nothing appeals to the construction of stocks. Well, Saturday I was in a mall with my wife, and she entered a shop, and they didn't have what they wanted, but they had it in several other malls. So we're all speaking about malls, but we're a few miles away in the same city. But they don't have stock. They have a few units, but nothing else. Why? Because they want to launch the product to exit today and to enter somewhere else tomorrow. So this puts us in the center of this notion. You can ask me a question about your wife. Did she want to go somewhere else? No, of course not. She didn't have it on time, so she didn't buy it. So of course there's a risk of losing to sell a bit. But they consider that this loss is much inferior than the loss they would have by having too much stock that wouldn't sell. So this is a big factor that determines. Of course, this way with shirts, but what if it happened with heavy machinery, with motors that you work with, exportation, so you're aware of what comes in the ports, what passes through the frontier. So at all times, the final customer, the final client, can not have the decision on time, as it happened with my wife with shirt. But it's much more difficult when we're speaking about materials that can be worth thousands of euros, because if the customer might not accept or repeat the order because the deadlines were not fulfilled, and there is the possibility to finish the contract or to apply some compensation. So this is a competitive advantage in the 21st century because globalization exists. We do not only compete in workforce or technological factor. We do not compete just in terms of innovation. We compete in which the logistic management is what involves and ensures efficacy and efficiency in all these processes. Because if we're good in innovation but not good in production, it's worth nothing. Especially given that the implementation of innovation has a deadline now, because we know that will soon be copied by everyone. We can say that we have goods that belong to a given brand, but in a few months we can find a differentiating factor that can change the cadence and everything. It's being done all over the world, so we're not going to be morality judges on that. But reinforcing here what has been said, we understand the concept of competitive advantage in an economy that competes globally in terms of resources, but also in terms of final markets, because we can't forget something here. Do you believe that the Chinese market is not important for European countries? What do you think? Well, until a while back, we understood that only China sold and that we only bought Chinese products and that they were destroying work posts in Europe. Is it true? What about now? What is the best car importer of Germany? China. What about Louis Vuitton products? China as well. And so on and so on. So as we said a little bit earlier regarding the growth of the workforce cost in China and Europe, they have been getting closer. This is going to keep happening, but we have to be aware that we need logistic management and logistic efficiency to continue. Good thing to discuss. To which point? What happened during the last 2 or 3 weeks with the Volkswagen world, with the car sector in Volkswagen, will have an impact on what is the export level for China, for America. As a factor that could tend to isolate as the behavior of one brand only, but this can affect the whole sector, because the local environment of the countries that regulate the circulation of cars, the local environment of the consuming public that values environmental protection, especially in European countries and Northern American countries, this is not going to change the rationality on on which was based the car sector, the European car sector that was based on fossil fuel. For Chinese people, or for China, this can be very serious given the pollution problems that they have, but given an American, Canadian, or European market, is it important or not? Yes, it's very important. Of course, there's here an opportunity for innovation because other technologies, electric and hybrid car, can have a great moment here to affirm itself. But the question here is to understand the importance of the local environment for the development of competitive advantages, being sure that in our logic in global economy, the management of the logistic process is fundamental because before production and after production, it can compromise if it's wrongly done. The whole process, even if it's well thought, well developed, and well established, affecting other components of the economic activity of that given sector. Is it clear? Now, I'd like to ask for your attention to be able to try at least and read at a certain distance the two sentences that you have here. I'd like for you to tell me if this is in line with what we've been saying and if it highlights what we've been saying. This is in your text as well. The first point is principle of comparable advantage. Each country will take advantage with the specialization in the production and the export of products being capable to produce at a relatively lower cost. On the other hand, each country will benefit should they import the own produced goods at a relatively higher cost. Second sentence. The advanced economies follow the route of specialization and labor division, which increases the productivity of its resources. The individuals and the countries at a later stage exchange at their own will the products in which they are specialists by other products, thus increasing the expenditure and standard of each.
What do you think of this? Is there anything that is untrue there? Nope. So apparently, everything that's here brings no doubt. This is a summary in 2 sentences. What we need to understand is that competition between companies and the states is not an angel game. It's not a pure game in which each part takes all the rationality of the economical premise. Each part is looking for advantages. And there is a word here, voluntarily. The game between nations is not always that voluntary. The financing conditions changes a lot. When we have a German investor with interest rates of 2 and 3%, and a Portuguese one that wants to put its business with 8, 9, or 10%, this is not a matter of production costs. This has to do also with the conditions of access to production that are different. Because the primary economics of money changes things. So it is absolutely true, but it's not completely this. So the competition of nations brings us to a situation where in the 21st century, each country, each region must have a list to diminish, to eliminate everything that are factors of loss of competitiveness that can in fact be eliminated. I'll give you an example. The differences between commercial justice in Portugal is a factor that must be eliminated. Another factor is the cost changing of the fiscal framework in which companies work on and invest on. Every year we in Portugal have a budget that changes the fiscal framework of several paragraphs. We need changes, and we are not in the supply chain yet. This is the pure management of the environment that can be investment in a certain country, fiscal stability, juridical stability. This is a decisive factor for most of the external factors and the internal also, because a Portuguese investor, because of inheritance, it has a lot of money to invest. If he thinks of investing or use speculation, if he wants to live a few years, he will decide that I will not invest, I will speculate. Because speculation is a risk activity. Has not as many risks as the level exchanges, fiscal changes, and the juridical difficulties that appear in the Portuguese panorama. Maybe if you don't agree, tell me, but this is an important factor. But we have then difficult decisions. Because in Portugal we are integrated in an economical area with no commercial agreement. This is an advantage. We are within the European Union, in which the free circulation of goods is an advantage within the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. This is a competitive advantage. They are integrated in the Ibero-American countries. The advantage also Portugal to be in English-speaking countries, Anglo-Saxon countries. This is an advantage also. There is a set of competitive advantages that regard in the supply chains when we import or export goods or finished products. Just as a result, there is a logistical development process that are quite important. Effectiveness of customs, of ports, the solutions for road solutions, the railway network also that needs improvements. These are critical factors. These are success critical factors of performance also for an economy that wants to simultaneously have in logistical performance a factor of advantage for its industries and services too. Factor of development of a logistics industry. Does this make sense? Okay. So, with a Belgian importer he wants to import wood from Belgium or from Africa, from Congo, from Zaire, from Angola. He can choose between Teams and Leixões port and out on Antwerp or Rotterdam, because the transport that it needs to do afterwards brings more advantages that the tranship is made to a port located in Portugal that can then go to European networks of transport. This can only happen if our ability of dispatching and making traffic of goods that come from that region can be an advantage in terms of price and cost, because it has to do with the days of operation also. Because the ship that needs to come from Portugal to Belgium can take 4 days, 2 days, or 10 days. It depends on the climate, of course, because when I come to Portugal, if I have a good railway or road network, I can get to Belgium in 2 days. Is this clear? This is a sales factor, a selling factor, a business that is quite important. Supply chain. Does this make sense? Is this clear? Okay. Here we have some summaries of commerce in the 21st century. We have central points of commerce throughout the world. When we want to speak of fashion, Hong Kong, Singapore, London, Sao Paulo, different cities. This means that this is a broadening of the commerce centers. Consumption is only in London and Paris? Of course not. Production and consumption are in Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore, Buenos Aires, South Africa. So we have an internationalization of production and consumption. Demand, and as we said, the most important is the final consumer. Demand goes from raw material for the ability of transforming those raw materials with the other production factors, having a final product that is attractive, desirable for the market and the final consumer, okay? Increase of competition. And political influences. This is clear for you. Freight forwarders and custom clearers, they need to work with export and import regimes. You see how important it is to be a part of the economical bloc or not. I don't know if you know. Freight forwarders. Customs brokers had the most profitable activity many years ago than they do now. Do you know why? Nothing was coming in that was not that. Customs brokers, they lost the economical activity, but the economy as a whole. Did it win? Was it a win-win situation? The economical activity as a whole, did it win or lose the brokers for the Portuguese market? I think it's a win situation because a lot of doors were opened that were previously closed. Because this administrative simplification and this reduction of rights trusted the production of goods and to satisfy install needs. Because a TV that would come to Portugal could have to pay 40-50% of rights, and the potential market for those who would buy a TV was very low. In my house we had a TV, but in my neighborhood in Lisbon, and it was a regular neighborhood of Graça. They had working people and from bourgeois also. Houses that had TV were not a lot of them. Neighborhood collectivities where they had a TV that most people, men, because women would not go, they would only go in special days. Women would not go. They were there in special days to see shows, Eurovision, another ceremony, something special. We have the notion, which is the most popular appliance in the 16th, 70s in Portugal. It's the radio, exactly. And the battery radio. It was not electrical, it was batteries. And in fact, the factor that's changing everything is Portugal coming to the European Union. And when there are no more rights on import and export, the economy wins because the GDP grew amazingly on these years. In the 60s, when we went to EFTA, it grows a little bit, and then it grows a lot when it comes to the European Union with the extension of the rights within the European Union. Now we have Portugal finding a logistic solution that it has for its economical activity and that it can offer to the other economies of the world, the factor that can bring the growth of the Portuguese economy. That's why we hear about the economy of the sea and logistic Portugal. Why? Because we have safety, stability, and geographical and climate conditions that are very distinct regarding competitors. Of course, we have to recognize the importance of political influences, right? We can see this as a gradual opening of barriers, the importance of the scale for us to be competitive, and the evolution of market to higher value products. Do you see any Portuguese company that can compete in the high value products? Is there a company that you can find like this? Do you think? For example, Portuguese shoes, is it the most expensive or cheaper? Most expensive, of course. With the own brand or with the Italian brand, because they made a difference by adding, because it has a specialization, it has scale, quality, and quantity, specialized labor, logistical processes, and the ability of innovation, because many have been in technological developments in terms of machines, design that are making a difference. So we need to clearly find in the economic process of each country what will allow us to find positioning in which our work is more valued. To be working to make Hawaiian slippers, it's not the way of the industry, of Portuguese industry, but to do what we do of working in highly valuable factors, that's the way, okay? So more and more the production system is set in the inputs that search is bringing, and now that we are launching the market to see if it sticks. Okay. Here we have four notions of products and product value. Essentially, I would like you to see these two: value chain of the product and product and service. That's the question that I posed you before our break. About logistic products, where I have the work of the freight forwarder and of the customs broker can be important in order that the product can have an added value on the final consumer. The quickness regarding the freight forwards with the freight forwarder and the customs broker, of course, the effectiveness of service, reducing all the dead time that will make the product to take longer for the raw material to come into production. So the logistical effectiveness of the waste days and this is something that the industrial process needs to fight, is to fight the waste of all the times that are not being used directly in the production process. Logistics and the set of services that it offers is fundamental for the value of the products. Okay. After this, about globalization, and before we stop, I would like to highlight and leave you a question for the coffee break. What is logistics? I don't want you to tell me now. What's the supply chain? What are the contributions that a good management of logistics can bring to your activity? Logistics, supply chain. And what can a good management of supply chain can benefit with your contribution as professional activities where you are acting on? Does this make sense? Okay? Let's have a coffee break, 20 minutes more or less, okay? See you soon.